Welcome to the Viking Age podcast, the official podcast of the VikingAge.com. My name is Chris Schad. I write for FanSided and Zone Coverage, and we do this right here on the Viking Age YouTube channel. We're also in podcast form on Apple and Spotify the very next day, but however you consume us, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and share so you never miss a new episode, and we can spread the word to the masses. On today's show, you can see him. We got a special guest. You can read his work at purpleinsider.football. You've heard him on the Purple Insider podcast, and someone who has earned the vaunted friend of the show label. His name is Matthew Coller. Matthew, I know it's only been a week technically for you, but how has your summer been so far?
Oh, not too bad. Got out on the golf course today, trying to get the swing in good shape just in time to not have any time to play again, which will be the case once training camp comes around. But as you know, it goes fast, so you try to cherish every moment we get because once training camp comes around, I know that every year with training camp, Vikings fans are jacked up, but I think this year will be the most pumped, the most excited, and basing on OTAs and minicamp, which I know we're going to get into, but we can't really take away a ton from OTAs and minicamp. And yet the interest from Vikings fans was absolutely through the roof for everything that myself and the other reporters at practice had to say. And so I was like, okay, I think this is a preview of just how much fans are going to be dialed into every moment of training camp, which is it's exciting. I mean, it's the last time that they were this relevant going into camp. This much excitement was maybe KOC getting hired. But even then, I think we felt like, yeah, this team is just okay. So probably 2018, after signing Kirk Cousins to the massive deal, was the last time I remember people being like, okay, first day of camp, this is huge. So I'm getting excited for that. And, I'll try to take advantage of the few weeks before we get there.
I think that's what you see when you have a 14-win season, first of all. And of course, in 2018, they were coming off the NFC Championship game appearance. We're not going to mention the score, but we'll just leave it there. But there's also nothing to distract Vikings fans right now. I mean, I'll probably get into it a little bit later, but the Twins are the Twins. The Wild, their Christmas is looking kind of meek right now, and maybe there's some Timberwolves stuff, but I mean, most people have their mind set on the Vikings. And the number one talker that everybody wants to talk about on a national level is JJ McCarthy. We've heard everybody throughout the offseason be like, how could the Vikings do this? You're going to start a guy that's never started a game before, as if, no franchise has ever done it. I want to hear the noise coming from inside the house, so to speak. So you were at minicamp. You saw JJ McCarthy throw in the flesh. What was your biggest impression of JJ McCarthy during Vikings minicamp?
Yeah, let me pick up with the conversation nationally, which I found to be pretty interesting because most people about JJ McCarthy on the outside, the talking heads that you're referring to, have seen one preseason game of JJ McCarthy, and it's not clear that any of them actually even watched that one preseason game from him. Whereas the reporters who are there all the time, myself, Seifert, Gessling, Kramer, Dane Mizutani, Alec Lewis, all of us and the TV people. I mean, we've seen many, many practices now at this point from JJ McCarthy going back to training camp and then OTAs and mini camp now. And so what I think I've noticed is that there's a struggle by the national folks to talk about JJ McCarthy because they're working with so little information. And yet, because the Vikings have really high expectations and because they were one of the highest, if not the highest spending team in the offseason, coach of the year, 14-win season last year, there's a lot of desire. Like, this is a really interesting situation. It probably, I mean, is it Mahomes coming from Alex Smith the last time we've seen something like this, where the previous quarterback had a lot of success, lost in the first round of the playoffs, and they said, okay, we're going to move on? I mean, maybe there's another example of that, but it's pretty rare that it doesn't happen with an injury or something, that a team shifts over like this. So they're at the center of the discussion, but there isn't a whole lot of information to work with or things to say. And I've found that fascinating to see, who's trying to plant flags on what side of the McCarthy debate, if there actually even is one. So, anyway, from OTAs and minicamp, what we actually did see is I want to paint a picture real quick to just give people an idea of what we're actually working with. So, minicamp and OTAs under Kevin O'Connell is a 7-on-7 passing camp and walkthroughs, and that is it. There are no times where the offensive and defensive lines are going full speed or even three-quarter speed against each other. So this is maybe 10 to 15 reps per practice of full speed 7-on-7, which is just receivers running at defensive backs and linebackers running route combinations, and JJ McCarthy standing there doing his drop and throwing the football to whoever he's throwing it to. So, what can we actually glean from that? Number one is that he looked comfortable throwing the football. And I think the number one thing that we were going out to try to see was, does he look like he's physically back to where he was last year? And I would say unequivocally, yes, that he does look like the same guy, the same size, throwing the football with confidence, not looking like there's any hesitancy with the knee or anything else like that, that he's fully recovered and good to go. That's a huge first step there, because you just never know with an injury like that. A meniscus is a little more complicated than an ACL. So that was sort of box check number one. And the other part of it is, does it look like a smooth operation? Are you completing passes? Are you having a lot of plays kind of run in a row? Or does the coach have to stop, the play every other drop back or something? And I thought it was a very smooth overall OTAs and minicamp. They got a lot done. They got a lot of plays. There weren't that many times where O'Connell was pulling JJ McCarthy aside, and they have these big, like, all 22 video boards that are out there. So O'Connell can look up at the board and see what happened and make a point. So if things aren't going that well, you're going to see him doing that a lot. And there was only a handful of times that I remember seeing that. And overall, just McCarthy was comfortable in making the throws. And it seemed like, from a vibe check perspective, that teammates were happy with how OTAs and minicamp went. And you heard from the press conferences that they've noticed that he has really embraced this QB1 role. And I was reminded of, in 2018, when Kirk Cousins got here, one of the things he said was like, well, there's already a lot of leaders on this team, so I'm kind of just trying to fit in. I don't think that's JJ McCarthy. I think JJ McCarthy's like, I'm the captain now. And you could see that from the way he talks. You could see that from the way he walks around a practice field. He is completely in charge. So what can we really take away? I think that means Super Bowl, Chris. I think that's where we're at. No, I mean, what can we really take away? We can really take away that all those practices looked like a confident QB1 in the NFL who is healthy and ready to lead this team. And that's about as far as we can really go.
Yeah, I mean, I think from afar, because again, I didn't see anything. Nobody, I'm just the jackass fan sitting on the outside. But my biggest takeaway has been how much this team has already bought into him. Jason McIntyre, who I believe is Con Coward's producer, he was saying Aaron Jones just brought him up unprompted, couldn't stop talking about JJ McCarthy. Harrison Phillips sounded like he wanted to run through a wall and said, this is like when Josh Allen took over, where, hey, buddy, the franchise is yours. Go drive the car or whatever. You got Justin Jefferson showing up to OTAs early and taking that advanced leadership role. And Cam Bynum, who's not even on the team anymore, he's sitting there in interviews being like, yeah, this guy is like, I can't remember the exact word he used, but he's like, he's sitting in on defensive meetings. He's a dog and like all of those stuff. And you could look at that and be like, this is typical OTA, Eddie Lacy's in the best shape of his life talk. But I mean, what is it about him that has everybody on board with JJ McCarthy already?
Something I go back to all the time with JJ McCarthy is that when he first arrived in Minnesota, first press conference after being drafted, we asked him, like, hey, did you ever see yourself being an NFL quarterback? Like, this is cool, right? And he said, oh, yeah, I did when I was in fifth grade. And he used the phrase edited my life, is what he said, that he edited his life to be an NFL quarterback starting in fifth grade. I did the same thing to play for the Boston Celtics or New York Knicks when I was in fifth grade, and yet never got quite to 6'7". So it didn't work out for me, but it certainly did for him. And I think that you could see just how seriously he has taken football and taken his path to being a pro. That when the state of Illinois canceled football in his senior year, he went to Florida and played for IMG Academy. And then when you go and play for Jim Harbaugh, you aren't there to just mess around and just I'm going to take the snap and run around and see what happens. You are there to run essentially an NFL style offense. I know it's much more complicated, much more detailed in the NFL, but that is as close as you're going to get to an NFL type of coaching experience with Jim Harbaugh. And the reason that you draft JJ McCarthy when he didn't have that many yards at Michigan and he didn't have that many snaps or dropbacks, nowhere close to the Michael Penix or the Jaden Daniels or the Bo Nix. The reason you draft him is the belief that when he arrives in this environment, he's going to thrive. He's going to take it seriously. He's going to put in every ounce of work, and that he is smart enough to gather all this information, to process it, to be able to spit it back out on the football field. But when they drafted him, it was a bet on upside. It was also a bet on the fact that he would grow physically, which I think is very clear that he did. And when I see the debates about his arm strength, it goes once back again to, hey, if you watched him in Michigan, and he'll admit to this, I think he was using way too much of his body to throw the ball and was throwing only fastballs. I asked him that at minicamp. I asked him, just, where have you grown as a thrower? And he said, well, I'm not a one speed pitcher anymore. And that was absolutely the case. But he's grown into understanding how strong his arm actually is, and that he doesn't have to do an entire windup like a fifth grader would to get the ball 20 or 30 yards down the field. And we started to see that touch improve. I remember one throw down the sideline, I think it was to Jordan Addison, where he guided it over Harrison Smith into the hands of Jordan Addison about 40 yards downfield. And it's like, okay, that's the throw that he didn't make very often in college. But again, that's the bet that you make. And if he was this version, he wouldn't have gone 10th overall. I think the Giants would have probably taken him 4th overall, and it would have been 4 straight quarterbacks. But the Vikings did have to make a bet on where this thing was going to go when they picked him. And I think, other than the injury setback, they've gotten the best case scenario. And I do think it's really hard in general for any person who's his age to walk into this locker room with Pro Bowlers left and right all over the place and then win those guys over pretty quickly, as you see. But what are they going to focus on? They're going to focus on the work ethic, his competitiveness, and how prepared he is. And I thought what you really saw is he retained a lot of what he had picked up through last year in running this offense. And that's why you see the good vibes, and you don't see a lot of hedging from the players. I mean, sometimes they'll never trash each other at the podiums, but sometimes you can tell when you say, oh, so what have you seen from this guy? And they're like, well, he needs to keep working. I mean, well, what we actually heard, though, from players was specifics about what they were seeing. Josh Metellus talking about what his arm strength looked like. And as you mentioned, like Justin Jefferson talking about trying to, get him to understand that he can trust him and when he can throw the ball to him and things like that. So I think they had the best case scenario when they drafted him to arrive at this point. And even though he had the injury, still feel like this is where they had expected to be when they made that selection 10th overall in 2024.
Yeah, and I look at all of this, and I think you put everything together and you're just like, okay, what are realistic expectations? Because we can sit here as Vikings fans and be like, oh yeah, Patrick Mahomes took a year off and he jumped in and he was God's gift to football. Dante Culpepper sits out a year behind Jeff George and Randall Cunningham, comes in, lights the world on fire, gets the Vikings the NFC Championship game. Another game we won't mention the final score, but NFC Championship game nonetheless. What do you think are realistic expectations for JJ McCarthy in his first year as a starter?
It's difficult because, having never seen it and you have to imagine it, that is a lot more challenging than if you've seen someone play and then you can project. Like, you've seen Bo Nix play, so you feel like you can much easier project what he's going to be into the future than JJ McCarthy. But I think we have a lot of evidence that is not direct but kind of indirect, like training camp, and just having seen some bad training camp practices. And sorry, Kellen Mond, for this, but from Kellen Mond, you know what it looks like when it's going well. And he was tracking toward, say, Sam Darnold hadn't been ready to start because of some injury instead of JJ McCarthy, they would have been completely comfortable last year starting him. Maybe it would have taken a little longer to get him assimilated at the beginning of the season, but I think people really underrate just how much you learn throughout a season behind the scenes as a quarterback and how valuable that can be. And also underrate how hard it is to come out as a rookie when you're going through all those meetings, all the combine prep and all the pro day and everything else. Like, it is exhausting, and you're not really focused on the things that you are going to need to focus on when you arrive. Then you're drinking out of a fire hose. Like, he showed up at this OTAs with the offense already downloaded into his brain and ready to go out and just teach his body how to do it. Like, he's got more knowledge in his head than his body has reps actually making these throws. But not only that, but also seeing what Sam Darnold dealt with for an entire season. I don't think that rookies, and maybe you saw this from Caleb Williams last year, can ever anticipate how hard this is, how violent the ups and downs are, how violent the players that you're going up against are, and how you can win 14 games and at the end of the season still have an entire fan base want you gone. The harsh realities of this league as well. But I thought he had a really good role model in Sam Darnold, who handled the situation with the utmost professionalism, won over the locker room last year, and seeing that process along with every week preparing as if he was going to start, even though he knew there was no chance he was actually going to, meeting with KOC every single week. And what JJ McCarthy knows also is that he's not going out there alone. We have a lot of evidence that Jefferson, Addison, Hawkinson, Aaron Jones, Kevin O'Connell, Josh McCown, these people are as good at helping a quarterback succeed as anybody on the planet Earth. And I don't know how many first year starters you can ever say took over a situation like this. The only ones I could think of are Brock Purdy and maybe Patrick Mahomes, because that team was already winning with Alex Smith. But usually the circumstances are a huge dictating factor to success. So I don't see any reason not to set the bar for the Minnesota Vikings at being a very serious contending team with JJ McCarthy in his first year, because all of that stuff, all of that evidence of what he did behind the scenes, and all of that evidence that we gleaned last year from watching Sam Darnold succeed, it all matters to the evaluation of what's going to happen this year.
Yeah, and I'm looking at Peyton Manning's stats just because I just kind of you were talking about how fast and physical. Like, once you're on the field, it's you can have the whole offense programmed in your brain, look great at OTAs and training camp and everything else. Peyton Manning rookie season, 28 interceptions. He also threw 575 times, which led the league. But even in year 4, Manning threw 23 interceptions. And I'm not comparing JJ McCarthy to Peyton Manning, but that's just kind of the learning process you have to go through. You know, Caleb Williams is a god at USC, and he's like nearly laying down on the bench, you know, just because he's so physically and mentally exhausted during a game against the Vikings. It's something you have to take into account for. And I think that's why a lot of people on the outside are going like, there's no way he's ready for this. There could be ups and downs, but if the Vikings do win double-digit games, I mean, you have to come back and be like, hey, JJ McCarthy, that was a success. That was a bet that won and cashed. And if they make a deep playoff run, that's all the better.
You know, it's interesting that you bring up Peyton Manning, because I think that the league has, even though it is always going to be beneficial, always and forever, to have young quarterbacks not start their first year. I just that's something that I believe in, and I think there's a lot of evidence to show that that can be very helpful. And even if I'm Cam Ward, I'm not sure I really want to start for the Tennessee Titans this year. Although someone's going to have to tell Mel Kiper that Cam Ward got drafted this year. But you know, when you think about, though, the recent history of young quarterbacks starting, there's a lot of success there. And I think that when we talk about that preparation from JJ McCarthy starting when he was not even in junior high yet, the resources available, the throwing coaches, the knowledge from playbooks, and your access to former players and current players and things like that to learn as fast as you can learn. You can take the iPad home. It's not just a, you know, a bunch of paper anymore in a playbook, but you can find out so much information just by yourself and learn so much information from the coaches and personal coaches and things like that he's had along the way. And then playing for Jim Harbaugh, I think that these guys now walk into the league so much more prepared than they ever were before. And I know Jaden Daniels had more actual college playing time, and so did Penix, and so did Nix. But those guys looked really ready to be NFL quarterbacks. And yeah, there were ups and downs. Nix had that one game where he had minus passing yards at halftime, and then he had the upswing in the second half of the year. And Penix got to sit for the first half of the season, then came in and looked pretty well ready to go. And Jaden Daniels got hurt in the middle of the year, kind of battled through that rib injury. Wasn't easy for him. Ends up in the NFC Championship game at the end of the day. And you go back even a year, Brock Purdy was in year 2 and has his team in the Super Bowl. I think Jalen Hurts was year 3 in the Super Bowl, even going back a couple years to what Jared Goff may have been year 3 when he took the Los Angeles Rams to the Super Bowl, maybe year 2 when they had one of the best offenses in the NFL. I think that these quarterbacks, this new generation of quarterbacks, is much better prepared than they were before. And that's another reason that I would bet on JJ McCarthy being ready to go, is that I just don't think that it requires in the NFL today, in the way they're able to teach these offenses, I don't think that it requires 4 years or something before somebody will finally hit their prime.
So I want to get to what else you saw at minicamp in just a second, but we got to get paid because Underdog Fantasy, it's one of the best places to make picks during basketball season. And you can take a swing at picking baseball this season as well on Underdog. Underdog is one of the leading sports apps, and you can now play in your state. Their app has over 100,000 five-star reviews and millions of players. And to play, all you have to do is download the app and choose whether a player will go higher or lower on one of their stats. You can choose from things like points, assists, home runs, strikeouts, and so much more. And once your picks feel good, you can play with as little as $1. And if you get everything right, you can win up to 1,000 times your money. I've been playing Underdog for years, and I've been getting into some baseball lately, picking against the Twins because that seems like a good strategy. And Coller, you'd even be impressed with this. I'm getting in on some WNBA action. So I took Paige Beckers higher on 18.5 points tonight, and I took higher on Skylar Diggins 3-pointers at 1.5. So sound good? Or
I like it. Yeah, I like it. And just to comment, and Underdog also is a sponsor of my show, but just to reveal that. But I love that app. I mean, that app is as easy to use and jump in and play. And I also like it that you mentioned you could play for very little money at times. But yeah, no, the WNBA is on fire this season. It's a great, great year. And who's better than the Minnesota Lynx? Nobody at the moment.
So if you toss on the links, you want to jump on that bandwagon, you can fire up the Underdog app and you can go higher, lower, and win some money. You can get in on all of that action. All you have to do is download the Underdog app and sign up with a promo code The Age, which is all one word. It's on the screen, and you unlock a special offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you make your first deposit. Join in on the fun when you sign up with the promo code The Age and claim your special offer today. You get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly upon your first deposit. You must be 18 plus, 19 plus in Alabama or Nebraska, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. If you are concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. And in Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342. And in New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. All right. So the rest of minicamp, we all know about JJ McCarthy. I want to know, as you were walking away from TCO Performance Center, what was it, a week ago? What was the one thing that you kind of walked out and said either, oh my God, or oh my God? Like, what stood out to you?
Well, let me allow for the caveats again that there isn't that much that you can really say, oh my God, to in these OTA and minicamp practices, but I'll try anyway. Uh, Jalen Naylor was one that stood out to everybody, and Justin Jefferson kind of laughed when we asked about it. Like, oh, you guys noticed too that suddenly Jalen Naylor has calves that are full of muscles. And it's pretty clear that he went into this offseason taking it seriously to get his body to a point where he could play the entire year, but also might have to do a little bit of grindy, gritty work. They had Trent Sherfield to do it last year, who would come in and he would block, and every once in a while he would catch a pass. But they don't have him now, and they have Rondale Moore, Ty Felton. Those guys are not bringing the grit to this wide receiver group. So they're going to need somebody to block from time to time. And I also think that he's aware that he has a contract that is going to be up and he will be a free agent. And if you look around the league, a middling type of wide receiver 3 is getting $10+ million per year on the free agent market. We saw Josh Palmer get a ton. We saw Tutu Atwell. So his motivation can be the Vikings gain, I think, this year. And I thought he had a really, really good OTAs in minicamp. And I think it was pretty clear that there is not a wide receiver 3 competition. When they drafted Ty Felton, there was some discussion of that. Like, oh, well, does this mean that Naylor's in trouble, or could they, replace him right away? I don't think that that is the case. I think what it is for Ty Felton is someone who can rotate in and catch a pass and run after catch and maybe, a deep shot down the field or something, rotate in a little bit. But this is Jalen Naylor's job, and that absolutely stood out over the last few weeks. And then really the secondary is kind of something we've got our eyes on a ton because Jair Alexander signed with Baltimore. I did not ever get the sense that the Vikings were super interested in Jair Alexander. I'm sure that they did their due diligence in checking in, but it didn't feel like that was imminent. And with Jalen Ramsey, kind of the same vibe of, I think Jalen Ramsey will probably end up somewhere else. I would be highly in favor of it because they've already made similar moves like that with Jonathan Allen, with Javon Hargrave, with Ryan Kelly, veteran players to kind of go all in. But it just doesn't feel like it's going to happen. It seems like they have a ton of confidence in Isaiah Rodgers as being a real dude for them, as somebody who has had some good streaks in the league and has played 500 snaps in a couple of seasons or close to 500 snaps. He's been a good kick returner, kind of a bit player, a rotational player. But Brian Flores really believes that he can be cornerback too to Byron Murphy Jr. And then, how they rotate the safeties could be interesting. Does Josh Metellus get time back with Harrison Smith because they're going to want Dallas Turner on the field? That was somebody I was watching a ton, and it stood out to me that Dallas Turner was playing some linebacker in those 7-on-7. So he was going back in coverage and not just acting as an edge rusher, but they were moving him all over the place. And again, it's, we're 7-on-7 here. So there was one play that I remember, but it's, not like training camp where it's, a lot of 11-on-11 padded full speed reps where we can really get a sense like, how does Dallas Turner look? I got like, I don't know, bigger. But that's, it's going to be a huge year for him. And they're really making a bet on him because they didn't go out and get any other edge rushers. And then another point of intrigue to me is the interior of the defensive line where you have your starting veteran star players, and then the next wave of a Levi Drake Rodriguez or Jalen Redmond. And where are those guys going to work themselves in? And Tyrion Ingram Dawkins was lining up in some different spots and getting some opportunity there as well. So there was kind of signs of what this is going to look like. The way I've always kind of described minicamp is call it like the qualifying period for a NASCAR race. Like it's not the race, but it might put you in a pole position going into the race. And I think somebody like Levi Drake Rodriguez or, Tyrion Ingram Dawkins, I think they made their case for you might want to give me some opportunities once training camp comes around.
It's kind of like as someone who covered South Dakota State down the road here in Brookings, it's like spring ball, I would assume, right? Where you go to spring practice and you have your notepad or whatever, you can write down a guy's name and you're like, okay, I'll keep eye on this guy going into camp, and you never see him again. Like, you're just kind of like, whatever, you're sitting there in like December and you're like, what happened to this guy? Like, he transferred or, just didn't pan out. And you're like, oh, okay. And I don't think there's that many guys on the Vikings this year, but it does seem like there's just more depth. This is just a fuller team. And this is what happens when you're paying your quarterback, what, $5 million compared to, well, what did Kirk Cousins get? 45 million from the Falcons? Like, you can do things like you can get a situational pass rusher, you can get cornerbacks, you can find starters in free agency. It's quite the concept. This just feels like an improved team. And it kind of segues into my next point that, you made a prediction at the beginning. When was it? When was your first prediction?
Right after the schedule came out, I did the same thing everybody else does. I wait for that every year to pick every game and then decide what I think the bar should be. And I kind of try to do a mix of whether I expect them to win and also like sometimes you got to throw in a loss to the Bears at Soldier Field because it's tradition, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. But yeah, I was at 10 wins with my initial prediction.
I mean, if you're a podcast, are you really a podcast if you don't do an NFL schedule prediction? Like,
No,
what are we doing here? Yeah, I mean, it's like a staple here. Maybe you're like a draft podcast or something where it doesn't really matter, but you got to predict the schedule. So you had 10 initially. You walked out of minicamp. You said, I think this team's got 11. I don't think this is a 14 win team. I think you'd be insane to expect that. I think my prediction was like 12 or 13 wins. But what makes you feel like this is a team that can win 11 games? And is that enough to win the NFC North this year?
I think it is enough to win the NFC North just because of how different the schedule is from last year. And if you go back, I did this when the Vikings won 13, maybe it was in 2022, and just looked at how many teams had won 13 games in back to back seasons. And most of them were quarterbacked by someone like Peyton Manning or Drew Brees or Tom Brady or Patrick Mahomes. So we're going to assume that JJ McCarthy, maybe in some people's minds, is with those quarterbacks, but I'm not quite there yet. And I think when you're going up against the likes of the Baltimore Ravens, the Pittsburgh Steelers, like there's tough teams here, the Cincinnati Bengals, and then the Super Bowl champions, the team that was in the NFC Championship game. I would not count out the idea that Dallas could be tougher than they were last year because they were missing their starting quarterback. Parsons was out for a while. They missed Trayvon Diggs. Like they were really banged up, but that's still a team that has a lot of talent on it. And the Vikings have to play them on the road. They've got to play Seattle. They've got to go to Los Angeles. It's a very, very difficult schedule. And then they've got to play the NFC North in the toughest division in football, where even the Packers, I've got some skepticism around them, but they're a good team. And Chicago, we should forever have skepticism, but look at the roster. It's good. So it's not going to be an easy track to get there. I think it is one of those seasons where they're going to need things to go right at the end of close games against really good teams and things like that. I think they definitely got a break, though, going overseas to play Pittsburgh and Cleveland. Those are two road games that gets knocked off. That's an advantage for them. And I also think if you just took the quarterback out of the roster and compared every other number 2 through 53 around the NFL, you might come up with the Vikings in the top 4, top 3. I mean, I think Detroit still deserves their credit, but they lose one of the best players in the world in Frank Ragnow to a retirement this offseason. And then, their offensive line, they also lost Kevin Zeitler. It doesn't look quite as great as it did before, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt with their entire roster. And then Philadelphia, you can't doubt them. They just won the Super Bowl as far as their roster strength goes, and they did it by having a very complete and excellent roster. But they did lose Milton Williams. But those are the only two teams that I would say, oh, yeah, they're okay. They're better. But by how much? Is it massively better than number 2 through 52 of the Vikings roster? I don't think so. I mean, I think this is the most stacked top to bottom roster that the Vikings have had since I started covering the team in 2016. And that would even count 2017 because I think this O line can be better than that offensive line was. So, and the running game, I mean, with Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason is probably a little bit better than Latavius Murray and Jerick McKinnon. Plus, Delvin Cook only played 4 games that year. So, I think that this is a super, super talented team that usually in the NFL today, outside of your Josh Allen, your Lamar Jackson, it's usually roster strength that is driving the success of these teams, not just one guy being an entire team like we had seen maybe from someone like Tom Brady or Peyton Manning. And even then, those teams had to be really good, but they could win no matter what with Tom Brady at his absolute best. But that's very, very rare. Most of the time, it's dictated by who has the best roster. And I think the Vikings do. I would give them more, but that's where, okay, we're going to have to see JJ McCarthy. Honestly, if it was Sam Darnold, I would be very confident in saying they could run back and get 12 because we already saw them do it with Sam Darnold. But I'm kind of baking into the prediction that there will be ups and downs with an inexperienced quarterback that maybe you wouldn't have with somebody that was a veteran.
And I think too, just looking at the NFC North, I've been on record. My prediction is that the Green Bay Packers will finish last in their division. It doesn't mean that I think they're suddenly going to become a 5-loss team, because I think their roster is better than that. But I mean, a 7 or 8 win team could finish in last place in this division because of what you mentioned. Chicago is better. Even though Detroit lost Ragnow and both coordinators, that's still a very good football team. And then you have the Vikings with this roster that has loaded up. And what I like about this team, and I think it's going to carry them through, we don't say the word championship here too much in Minnesota because, oh my God, you're going to jinx it, or we're so scarred and whatever. You know what? I like the fact that this team feels like it has a championship feel to it. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, the Twins just exercised Rocco Baldelli's option because, oh my God, what else are we going to do? Who are we going to get? And the owners are asleep at the wheel and won't spend any money. You have the Wild over there in St. Paul, and they're talking about, well, Christmas, we're going to spend on all these free agents. And then everybody stays with their team. They're like, uh-oh, what do we do now? Like, I like the fact that the Vikings had a 14-win season, and they are not hiding from those expectations. They are locked in. You mentioned it earlier in the show, like the vibes are just, hey, like, let's finish this job. And, honestly, are the Vikings probably going to win the Super Bowl? No, I don't think so. Like I said, like you said, we got to see JJ McCarthy play. But I think this is a damn good football team. And I think that's why, getting back to the original point, everybody's really excited about this team. Everybody wants to see JJ McCarthy go out there and throw lasers against the Bears in week 1. They want to see this running game, which has Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason. They want to see the offensive line that we didn't talk about because honestly, they're playing patty cake during minicamp. Like there's just a lot of intriguing things. And I think it's the most exciting Vikings team. Like you mentioned it, 2018 is probably the year. Maybe you could say 2009, but that was with Brett Favre. So it was a totally different situation. Like there is genuine interest in this team. And I think championship is within their range of outcomes.
Well, when you go back to 2022, and I think about this all the time, when Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell take over, and Kwesi drops the phrase competitive rebuild, and everybody sort of latched onto that. But I thought that it was great because it really told us exactly what the mindset was going to be, that they were not going to tank, and they probably had too much talent to tank anyway. When you have Justin Jefferson, it's very hard to go lose 14 games or something, but they were going to get the salary cap situation right. They were going to draft the quarterback, and they were going to spend like crazy. And that's exactly what they've done. And you've seen this model work many times. I mean, this isn't something we didn't know about. This is something that, and what I think is so fascinating about this current situation is that it was talked about many, many times. I mean, you and I, through the years, probably had this conversation several times about Kirk Cousins, the contract, and I always thought it was twofold. I never thought Kirk Cousins was actually a good enough quarterback to really take a team to a Super Bowl. I thought he was too flawed with the lack of athleticism, the lack of risk taking, stuff like that. But, he's a really, really good quarterback. And you could always see a world where if the roster was this good, then maybe that could have happened. But you can't have a roster this good if you have Kirk Cousins at the price and with the contract structures that he had throughout the years. And they knew that. And they looked at San Francisco and they looked at Philadelphia. And how did they do it? Well, it's not rocket science. Everyone treats Howie Roseman as if he's just some mastermind genius. And I'm not doubting Howie Roseman. I think he's great. But I mean, he got a rookie quarterback contract. The rookie quarterback turned out to be really good. They stacked a ton of talent around it. And then they signed him to an extension that made the first couple years very easy to work with. And there you go. There's your model. You got to hit on a lot of things in order to make it work. And we still don't know if they're going to hit on all those things. They have taken risks here. They've taken some risks in the secondary. They've taken some risks with older players that have recent injury histories. I think it's a good strategy overall for Kwesi Adofo-Mensah to say, hey, like this is an injury that shouldn't impact the guy's following season. We saw Daniil Hunter tear his pec and then come back and be unbelievable. So a torn pec is not something that necessarily tends to carry over to another season. I think that's a clever strategy to then get a discounted price on somebody because they had an injury. And I also think that veteran teams usually are the ones that win the Super Bowl. So it's not like it just sort of came together randomly. It came together really intentionally. And the other part of it too is that you can't, and I know a lot of people obsess over this because they love the draft as much as they love football games, but you can't ever predict whether you're going to succeed or fail in the draft. Nobody can. Every team, even the best, even Howie Roseman had bad drafts. Justin Jefferson could have been an Eagle, folks, but instead Jalen Rager was. So nobody's perfect when it comes to that. I always think it's how you find ways around that, which means you have to develop an Ivan Pace, who's an undrafted free agent. It means you have to find somebody, an Andrew Van Ginkel or Jonathan Grenard, who had not been really used to their full potential yet. And that's what they're making this swing at Isaiah Rodgers, as somebody that they got fairly cheap, but hoping that he hasn't quite reached his potential yet. All of that is really, really good team building process with the target of winning a championship. And I think the frustration for me for years covering the team and probably for you cheering for the team was, does it feel like they really are chasing a championship here? Or does it feel like everybody's just trying to keep their job for another year and praying that they nail a draft or something like they did in 2015? I felt from 2020, 2021, it was really just trying to keep their job and pray, and maybe even 2019 as well. Whereas this does not feel that way. It never has. It's always felt like it was headed in a particular direction. And now they've arrived. And that's why the bar should be set high. You should be saying win the division. You should be saying compete for a Super Bowl this year because this was the plan all along. And here it is. It's come to fruition.
And the best part about the plan, I think somebody posted like the Our Lads depth charts from 20 so they would have taken over in 2021, or I think it was 2022 they posted that. And they posted that and they crossed off all the people that have left, and it was like three people left, like Darisaw, Jefferson, and I'm forgetting somebody else, but
CJ Ham.
CJ, yeah, like CJ Ham or something. Yeah. Brian O'Neill. There we go. Like they gutted the roster and like nobody noticed. They still won 2/3 of their games and they did a rebuild. Meanwhile, like you look at Chicago, it's like scorched earth, 3-14. We're gonna get Caleb Williams. And it's like, if JJ McCarthy hits, like they again, regime's not perfect. Like 2022 draft, bad, but like they're going to look like geniuses if JJ McCarthy's good and he leads them to NFC championship games, Super Bowl, whatever. Like this has been the vision all along. And like I said, it's very exciting and very intriguing for everybody involved.
And a little bit of luck from an Achilles as well, because you do have to wonder if Kirk Cousins had had a great 2023 season, then they would have maybe changed their plans. I don't know. Maybe they could have been the ones giving him the 4-year, $100 million guaranteed contract instead of the Atlanta Falcons. So things do have to go right to some extent along the way. But you're right that following that path is what took them here. And when you can see it and you can see the competence of it. And then the other lucky thing is too, Brian Flores was a winning head coach in the league, and then other reasons got him out of that position in Miami and available for a defensive coordinator spot. And now he is an elite defensive coordinator in the league. So in any circumstance where you turn out to be good, like San Francisco, you pick Mr. Irrelevant as a quarterback and then he turns out to be good. Everybody is going to need some good luck, and they're going to need that this year if it's going to work out. Where you mentioned about how many games they've won, now it's kind of when I listen to Vikings fans talk or see them talk about Kevin O'Connell, and the narrative on O'Connell, which is correct, is, hey, like you got to start winning the playoffs. Can O'Connell really win in the playoffs? And I was thinking about, sometimes I like to use little like, hey, if things were like this, then what would we think? If O'Connell had won 9 games each season these first 3 years, we would have been like, that's pretty good for a team that was mediocre and flawed when they got here, a team that took apart a lot of its problematic players, salary cap wise, and then a Sam Darnold football team. Like that would be pretty good. But since they won 13 and then 14, now it's, hey, like, why didn't you win the Super Bowl in those 2 years? Because you got to 13 and 14, not to excuse the playoff games, because he got outcoached in both of them. And that's not acceptable for the future if you're going to compete for a Super Bowl. But I just think that they've raised the bar so much that that's where we're at now with this team. And I think it's really telling that everybody would have been happy. I remember talking about this last summer, probably to you, saying, like, hey, let's just see what happens. Like, who knows? The Vegas thinks they're going to win 6 games, and the prognosticators are putting Caleb Williams Bears ahead of the Vikings. But, whatever. We'll just ride the roller coaster. We'll see if we have any fun. And then, on to JJ McCarthy. And it turned out to be then a huge disappointment when they didn't go deeper in the playoffs because they had set the bar so high. But I think that also tells you about what they have here for a head coach. And go back to the 2022 hires. If Brian Daboll gets fired this year, you're talking maybe 1 or 2 left with Kevin O'Connell, and the Vikings fell into the coach of the year. And the hard part for me, Chris, sometimes is as we talk about this, and it's like, well, they've got all of this right, and they got all of that right, and they've got this quarterback who looks pretty good, and they get whatever. What should I be ripping apart, Chris? For years, we would have discussions and fans would get mad at me for being too critical of Kirk and things like that, and now I'm like, what are we doing here? But objectively speaking, like, they are going into this season with a very serious chance to be there when we get into January. And I think they've done a lot of things right.
That they have. We got we got mini camp in the rearview mirror, off-season activities. Now we're looking ahead toward training camp. And of course, the content, even though this is a slow end of the season, it does not stop at Purple Insider. What you got going on over there right now?
Yeah, that's kind of a good point, is that there's so much excitement. I'm not slowing down at all. One of the things that I like to do is episodes just answering fan questions, and those are always great. Fan questions are great. And so I'm kind of doing a lot of that, just writing some interesting things that I'm thinking about. Like, I'm working on an article for, probably it's already up by the time people listen to this, about just how uniqueness in the NFL and in pro sports can win based on the NBA finals, and how Indiana and Oklahoma City were unique teams in their own way. So what's unique about the Vikings, and can that guide them through? So I'm kind of, doing little thought experiments, reacting to new stuff, and counting down. Also, that's my big thing here, counting down the 25 most interesting players at training camp. So I've been working on that as well. So if anybody wants to go check out the newsletter, purpleinsider.football, the YouTube page, Purple Insider, just type it into your computer, see what happens. That's probably the best plan.
Exactly. Purple Insider, right into the search bar. You'll find it right there. Also, .football, very cool. I want to point that out. That just sounds awesome.
Wasn't expensive to buy. Purpleinsider.football.
So he is Matthew Coller, purpleinsider.football, the Purple Insider podcast. Of course, you can check out my work. I am Chris Schad at Zone Coverage, as well as Twins and Wild stuff over there. And I'm also on the FanSided RBN network. So if you're ever wondering what's going on in the rest of the NFC North, we got you covered. Dairyland Express for the Packers, DeWindy City for the Bears, and Detroit Jock City for the Lions. Go ahead, check those sites out. But this is the Viking Age podcast, the official podcast of the VikingAge.com. I'm Chris Schad at The Real Chris Schad. He is Matthew Coller at Matthew Coller. Is that right?
That's correct.
I didn't know if there was NFL in the hashtag.
Never.
Not,
Never.
No,
that's for weirdos like Arif.
Yes. Our friend Arif Hassan. But we do this every week right here on the Viking Age YouTube channel, and we're in podcast form on Apple and Spotify the very next day. But however you consume us, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe so you never miss a new episode and we can spread the word to the masses. For Matthew Coller, I am Chris Schad. This has been the Viking Age podcast.